Hey everyone, welcome to week 66. Today is day 3. This is Wednesday. This is our third day on our Cobalt Teal week. Remember, this week we're working with a primary color palette where Cobalt Teal is our soul blue. So we'll see how it goes.
Okay, let's get started. This is day 3. This is our third day on our Cobalt Teal week. And yesterday for Spanish Tuesday, Martes de Español, I made a little more research on Cobalt Teal and how the cobalt pigment actually works. But first, I have to admit that I had no idea where the name Cobalt Teal came from. I had no idea where teal came from. I usually associated teal with a color, with a light blue-green. That was the name of the color, and that was it. But I had no idea that it actually has to do with the bird, with the duck. I was not familiar with the teal being a duck. And it's fascinating. I mean, we spoke a little bit about this. It's incredible how human beings, when we are at an impasse, when we don't know how to define something, how to understand something, the only plausible, quantifiable thing that we can do is look upon nature and find echoes in nature of that which we're trying to understand. You know, if we're trying to explain to ourselves something and we can't grasp it, we have to look at nature. Again, it shows my ignorance, but we don't have these types of ducks here, even though there are some Canadian ducks that migrate to Bogota and spend a couple of months here. But these are not mallards, by the way. They're quite different, but I was not familiar with the teal. Coincidentally, we might as well have called it cobalt mallard. I mean, it sounds ridiculous now, but if you think about it, I mean, the color of the mallard's head, it probably goes more towards an emerald green hue, and the bit of the wing that's gorgeous, you know, that bluish little part of the wing is more towards the cobalt, I would say. But again, it wouldn't have been weird if we would have just called a blue-green mallard. It would have been totally fine. And it's completely in line with calling a color teal. By the way, the female teal, oh my God, so much more beautiful than the male. I mean, the male has, again, that bit of beautiful color in its head, but the female teal, that is a little bit grayer, earthy tones, and then suddenly you get this tiny little bit of bluish green in the wings. Oh my God, that's to die for. It's incredible. I find her far more appealing than him. He's a little bit loud, but her, oh, so much class. Very, very nice. What's really funny is that the economy of that color that's present in the female teal is what led me, after the fact, because I have to say this, I have to accept this, is what led me to look at Siebes' painting from yesterday, a couple of days after I had finished it, and I realized that there was this little stroke that I had done in the painting session, this little tiny note of what was a bluish greenish gray, like a light blue-green gray that was on the shadow side of Siebes' portrait. And at the time, I remember I wanted to be a little bit bolder with that tiny little stroke. Honestly, I was imagining something akin to a Ben Björklund painting. I think Ben does that along with so many other amazing things, but he does those little floating colors, those little bits of colors that are high chroma that sometimes feel like they don't even belong to the painting. I don't know what makes him drop those little notes of colors in the middle of a painting, but he does it so well and so natural. Like nothing in Ben's paintings seems forced. I think that that's the most remarkable and beautiful thing about his work. It just kind of makes sense and it's effortless. As soon as you see his work, and we are very, very lucky. You know, I'm going to say I'm very lucky that Danny gave me as a present one of Ben's paintings, because I was trying, you know, this is a true story. I tried to purchase a painting from Ben for years. And Ben just sells every single thing he makes. I mean, he is that good and it just makes sense. You know, he's absolutely incredible. But I know Ben and I was never able to get him to sell me the paintings that I wanted to buy. And I had given up. You know, I always wanted a painting of Ben, just something to remind me of him and his amazing work. And I was like, no, it's not going to happen. And I'm totally fine. You know, I was like, okay, I'm totally fine. I'm just blessed to know of his work, and I'll just celebrate his work every time I have the chance to do so. But Danny surprised me. Danny really, really surprised me for my birthday last year, and she got Ben to send her this amazing painting, and it's the jewel of all of our collection. I mean, we're very, very lucky to have had the chance to support in a very small way the work of many, 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 in particular young artists out there. And you guys know who you are because we contact you guys directly, and we are super, super proud of everything that we have. Ben's painting is just something very, very close to our heart. I don't know. It just makes me gasp for air every single day I look at it. It's just a reminder of how something that can be so simple, so easy to do, can be magnificent. Like my paintings sometimes, many times I would say, just feel labored. Like I have to fight so hard to try and make sense of a painting. And Ben just gracefully glides through a painting and resolves it in a way that is so economic and so simple and so amazingly good that it hurts. I mean, it's pain because you realize how far you are from being a great painter, but it's the good sort of pain because it reminds you of how beautiful this world can be and how people that are special can make things that really, really move you. Sometimes, and I spoke about this last week, I think, sometimes it's very hard to paint because it just seems like, painting makes no sense. It doesn't. If you think about the world, like the big world that has to solve big problems, big issues, relevant things to our existence, like painting doesn't seem to do anything. But if you wake up in front of a painting that just provides you with life and with hope and happiness, you realize, wow, painting is very, very powerful. It may not stop a war. It can't cure disease. It can't fight inequality. But I do think that a painting can be really powerful in reminding us of our brighter side. And especially if you know the painter and if you know that there's a good soul behind the painting, it just reminds you of what we are truly capable of, what our true potential is. And I think that every single day I'm grateful that I wake up and I look at Ben's painting and I'm like, yeah, this world is worth trying to understand through painting. It's exciting trying to uncover these secrets that the world has through painting. I'm not saying that us painters are going to make visible truths that are invisible to everyone else. No. I'm speaking about self-knowledge. I'm speaking about self-acknowledgement. Things becoming clear to us in particular while we are painting or after we've painted and we're just reflecting upon the painting act. These are the things that we unearth for ourselves. It is our understanding. So yeah, a beautiful painting in the end just provides you with life and energy and hope and reason for being. So as I was saying, and this is the tragic part of the story, I try to invoke my inner Ben Bjorklund. And of course, it's not enough to just clench your butt cheeks and try to invoke a great painter. And hopefully they come to your aid and you're able to put down like this very masterful stroke. That clearly didn't happen. But what I did realize was that I needed a little bit of courage that I just didn't have by myself. And Ben was a reminder to just go for it. I'm saying this as if going for it meant that I was doing something incredibly brave. And I didn't. This is a tiny stroke. This is just a millimeter of paint. This is like nothing. It's almost imperceptible. But it's just a note. It's a beautifully dissonant note that is nestled in the painting. And I thought I was going for it while I was painting the painting of Ciebe, and I realized that I didn't. When the painting was dry and I looked at it, that moment, that hint of something happening in Ciebe's eye in the shadow side of the face, I could sense I was going for something. Again, I just didn't have the strength to do it. I just didn't trust myself to do it. The reasons are many, and we don't have to get into them, but we can summarize them by saying painting is tough. Painting is super, super hard. And that's one of those moments where you kind of know what you have to do, but you just can't muster enough courage to do it. You just don't have the knowledge or the ability to do it. That's just the plain truth. so it was tough for me to do it at that moment where we were recording. But when I saw it a couple of days later, let me do this tiny little touch there, and let me see if I could punch it up just a little bit. I don't want to be too loud. I just want to touch it up just a little bit, like that stripe in the feathers, like that beautiful moment in the feathers of the female teal. I just wanted that. I just wanted that little bit of accent that is so classy. Again, female teal, gorgeous. She is absolutely beautiful. But I wanted to do that. I wanted to have that tiny little imperceptible scream of happiness. I wanted it to be there. And I did it. At first, I'm going to tell you guys the truth. At first, I put it down and it was way too loud. I got too excited. I was like it needs more teal, more cowbell. And I put it down and I was like, woof, that's a little bit too much teal. Clearly it didn't work. It was way, way too much. And it was just popping out of the shadow mass. So obviously it wouldn't work. It had to burrow itself into the shadow mass and still be like punchy. So I adjusted it a little bit. I just made it a little bit lighter. And then I put it down again. Scraped it a little bit because I had courage, but as soon as I put paint down, I backed off a little bit. So I think I found like a really nice balance. And again, here we are spending 5 minutes talking about like a millimeter of paint. It's this tiny little nothingness of a stroke. And it made me think about everything that's wonderful about painting. And I thought that was amazing because that's what I'm kind of looking for. Those moments symbolize what I'm hoping to get when I decide that I want to experience a color throughout a week. Because it's not just about, all these formal qualities of that pigment and just trying to analyze the pigment to death. I mean, all those things have to happen, and they will happen if you use the color. And if you're paying attention, you're going to see how that color behaves in the wild, as soon as it enters a palette and as soon as you're trying to solve things with that color, through that color. You're going to recognize those things. So those things are never going to escape me if I am willing to pay attention. All these experiences are worth having with every single pigment that is out there. If you made an effort in trying to understand every single pigment that's out there, every single wonderful color that's available to you, I'm sure the experiences would be so enriching. They would be so, so beautiful. And the last thing I want is just to say, you know what Cobalt Teal is great for? It's great for painting, blah, blah, blah. I really, really dislike when the conversation about a color reduces itself to a very particular use. No, with Cobalt Teal, you can paint anything. You can paint the universe. The most wonderful thing in the world is the fact that it gets its name from this echo in nature that we see in wildlife, but it doesn't mean that suddenly there's a duck in front of you and you go like, oh my God, if I only had some teal to paint that teal. To understand color in such a one-to-one way, it just doesn't make sense. Again, that's such a tiny, tiny, tiny part of what color means that we would be missing its true nature. And we wouldn't really understand how color activates once it's surrounded by other colors. And what's very funny about the way in which we've been using Cobalt Teal throughout this week is that, when I was using the quinacridone magenta as a replacement for either my cad red or my alizarin, that are my two kind of trusted reds in my palette, when I was using that magenta for the red hue in a primary color palette, and I think that I've been using it alongside with bismuth yellow, cobalt blue, and of course titanium white. I don't know, there was something missing. I think magenta is a wonderful color, but I think it escapes me a little bit. I think there's a loudness to it that I just don't seem to understand that well. And you know what's weird? What's very, very weird? In this palette with Cobalt Teal, it just makes more sense. I don't know what it is. It makes sense with the colors that are around it. And that's the way painting should be. I'm not saying that these primary colors are perfect. Like this triad of colors is just the perfect balanced example of what a primary color palette should be. But there is something that makes sense about it. Now, does that mean that it's perfect? I don't think so. Perfect in the sense that would I be able to translate a ton of stimuli through this palette? Maybe not. Particularly in the darker tones, it just suffers a lot. Cobalt Teal is a very almost enigmatic color because it's so opaque, but it doesn't tint that much. It's not overpowering at all, and it doesn't chalk up your mixes. You know, you would expect a color that is so light to have an effect on your mixes. And I guess my thinking of that is because, let's say, other light blues, like let's say King's Blue, well, King's Blue is just ultramarine and titanium. So I've always associated those blues having the risk of chalking up your color, of making it muted. But with Cobalt Teal, there's nothing. I mean, it seems so opaque, so light, but it's not really affecting your mix in the way you think it's going to affect it. Now, regardless of that, it's still a light blue. Both cobalt and ultramarine are obviously darker. And what I miss from my blue hue is that kind of rich velvety darkness and that aid that you get from the blue hue when you're trying to mix darker tones. So with this palette, you're kind of left in a weird place where you are going to sacrifice a bit of contrast because you're not going to have the darker tones in your value scale accessible to you. That's just how it is. The darkest you can get is probably through the magenta. And if you don't want that, kind of red-violet hue for your darks, if you try to darken it with that blue, you're going to get a red-violet or a blue-violet, depending on how much Cobalt Teal you use. And as soon as you start introducing bismuth yellow, which is not super opaque again, but it is going to have some incidence in the value of that mix, it just lightens it up. It makes it earthier, of course, but it's going to lighten up your mix. There is going to be an inherent sacrifice, especially in the darker tones that you can mix in this palette. So perfect primary color palette? Probably not. You're going to gain a ton of things. I mean, the saturation, the richness of the colors that are available to you in this palette, they're absolutely beautiful. I have to say it. Very inviting, too. I am so afraid of saturation, and the colors that I've found in this palette are just gorgeous. They're not loud. They don't, bother me like the way in which other pigments have bothered me in the past. Maybe I'm getting used to them. Maybe that's just a side effect of painting, every single day and trying to make myself uncomfortable. But I don't think so. My soul is gray. So that's never going to change. And saturation is always going to be something that I shy away from. I just don't have that personality. But it sounds so strange to think that these three colors, during this week have been very, very inviting. Or maybe you know what it is. Maybe it's just so clear from the start that I am going to have to make sacrifices. I mean, those things are so visible from the start that me offering resistance to those things just doesn't make sense. It makes no sense. The palette is finding no opposition in me. My stance right from the beginning has been, let's do this. Let me learn from this color. And it's been a blast because I've realized that even though these colors are highly saturated, they're still primary colors and color theory applies to them. So you could gray a ton of stuff out if you're just canceling that saturation through complementaries. You can still get these beautiful grays with these wonderful hues to them. You can still very much exercise control through this palette. So there's a ton of range that I'm recognizing and I haven't even started to explore. For now, I am very happy, very content with the expressive side of the palette. I think today's painting of Josie is just relishing the fact that I can paint with those magentas and purples and blues. I feel like a modernist. I feel like I'm discovering color like 120 years ago. So it feels pretty amazing. That's going to be it for today. We'll see you guys tomorrow where we continue this expedition into the nature of Cobalt Teal. Love you guys. See you tomorrow. Bye.